Thank you. And confirmation of the agenda. Resolution.
And council adopts the agenda for the special meeting of council on April 4th, 2025 with the addition of comments from Duck Terry Limited and the Township of Malahide.
Moving seconder, Deputy Mayor Barber, and Councilor Chapman. Any more comments? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 4, declaration of pecuniary interest, attorney declaration. Item 5 is a public meeting, which I think we have a great number of people here attended. Before we begin the meeting, I would like to give you some guidelines on process. We are here to consider Aylmer Council's recommendations for negotiations. So this meeting does not represent a final outcome, but an input stage on the boundary adjustment. I will ask the clerk to outline the procedure for the meeting shortly. In order to allow everyone a chance to speak, I will ask that members of the public try to keep their comments to 5 minutes. It would also be appreciated if you could reference support of another presenter's comments rather than repeating the same information. When you come forward, I would ask that you state your name and property address for the record prior to addressing council. Please remember, we are meeting today as a community, working together in good faith. And this meeting will be conducted with respect for all parties involved. Thank you. First, we need a resolution to enter the public meeting.
The council do now commence a public meeting at 7:03 p.m. to receive input from the public with respect to the town of Aylmer area boundary expansion.
Moving second, Councilor Trotsky and Councilor Ozlach. All those in favor?
This meeting is taking place under the Municipal Act 2001 as amended to receive input on potential restructuring through a boundary adjustment. At this public meeting, council will hear public representations regarding the town of Aylmer settlement area boundary expansion. Council will hear comments in the following order. A presentation of the final recommendations report from Stantec Consulting Limited, the report of the Chief Administrative Officer, any comments from the public, and then staff and the clerk.
Thank you. Let's begin with Stantec Consulting. Please provide a report on the boundary expansion. You have an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for everybody for showing up today. Just very briefly, I wanted to introduce some background to this project. So the boundary adjustment process was identified as a priority for the town of Aylmer starting in 2012. It was considered again in 2016 and again delayed and budgeted in 2020. The most recent iteration that is before you this evening began in earnest in 2022. That started with a population projection analysis. That took a little longer than anticipated because of the Volkswagen Power Co plant. So we had to revise those population projections, and the final outcome of that was presented in October of 2023. Following that, there was some preliminary proposal made to the town of Malahide, and there was a request for further information. We went back and council engaged Stantec to do the work. So we've had significant engagement and public public engagement as well through this process, and we finally got into the process where we're having the statutory meeting on the parcel selection. That would be a recommendation that we hope council will advance to Malahide for discussions. There still is a subsequent requirement for official plan meetings and amendments. So as the mayor referenced, this is a step in an ongoing process, but it has been a process that started almost 13 years ago, but was only started in earnest by this term of council again. And with that, I'll pass it over to Stantec to present the report.
Thanks very much. Can everyone? No, darn, okay. If I start talking with my hands and the mic gets further away, if somebody can just raise their hand and call me out on that. My name's Eric Bass, I'm an urban planner with Stantec, and we're here doing a small piece of what's actually a larger piece. I'll try and do as much as I can to put it within that context. But myself, my colleague Rachel Hagan, also a planner with Stantec, are here to also answer your questions, answer those of council as well, and try and explain how our part fits into this larger piece. I think the first portion that we'll talk about is the project background, some of the things that happened leading up to this. We'll talk about the land requirement, the settlement land requirement, and then we'll talk about the evaluation criteria that we use to try and create a framework for assessing different potential parcels to be added in a settlement area or some employment plans. We'll take a look at what those scores are, and then we'll talk about what our report's recommendations were. Just in terms of the process, we have a few different we've had 2 public meetings before this, and we've really broken it down into 4 stages. So the first part was the project launch and trying to collect information, the mapping, past reports and studies that have been done, understanding what does the official plan say, what do these reports say, and what does that mean for how we structure our study. The next one was developing a parcel scoring methodology, a way that we can take some of these criteria, these things that matter when trying to decide what land should be added to a settlement area, and trying to score them, trying to create a score framework. And we had a public meeting where we introduced our first draft, we heard feedback from the community, and then we made some adjustments to that before we went on to the next stage. The next stage of that was identifying candidate parcels. So we looked at lands all the way around the existing town boundary. And we ended up coding them by letters as seemed like the best idea. It's the best, we kept track of them that way. You'll see those letters repeated today. We also did some mapping analysis through that as well to identify things like floodplains, setbacks from rail lines, natural heritage features like forests and wetlands that will need to be protected according to provincial requirements. We netted those out, and I'll talk a bit about that. My colleague will talk about that as well, and how that fit into the final scoring. And then finally, we'll get to this very moment right here that we've all been waiting for. We finished our report with recommendations, and this is our summary of what that is. So first, for some of the background for this. So municipalities on a regular basis, they are crunching numbers, or they're getting others to crunch numbers to figure out how quickly is the land that is designated for the community being consumed by new development, by new homes, by schools, by parkland, commercial uses. And there are 2 studies that I want to talk about today because those feed into 5 recommendations. The first one was from 2024. It was commissioned by the town, and it concluded that there was a shortage of 28 hectares. 28 hectares of residential land and a shortage of 12 hectares of employment land. So between now and in the next 30-year time horizon, because that's usually how long plans are projected into the future, that's how much land we're short. There's a couple assumptions that come into this. We look at how's the population changing, how many homes do we think there needs to be to accommodate that population, and then roughly how much land does that translate into. The second study is actually quite recent. It actually came out in February and it's produced by the county. It was produced by the county, and I think what's most important is it was produced using Ministry of Finance numbers, which is not particularly interesting, but why I want to mention that is that there's been some changes to provincial policy on how planning is done. And the provincial planning statement states that Ministry of Finance numbers for projections get precedent over other numbers. This is a really recent change, so when the town of Aylmer commissioned the study last year, the province actually kind of made that change to the provincial planning statement. Yeah, so this is new numbers, and it actually had a change in the recommendations. So instead of the 28 hectares of residential land, they're recommending 35.6. So an increase of 7.6 hectares. And it also concluded that there wasn't necessarily a need for additional employment land. What I do want to highlight though is, like everything, there's a bunch of assumptions that go into this. We don't, as planners, we don't know what's going to happen in 30 years. We don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. So we try and do our best guess when they're doing this map, based on what's happened in the past, based on certain trends that are happening, not just here in Aylmer, but across the county, across the province. And then they try and make a best guess into the future. So I don't think that there's that much there's not a conflict between these two. There are two different ways of looking at the information that's available when and what's there, and trying to project it. So based on those as our foundation, we created an assessment criteria, and this is 4 tables. The text is very small. I'll try and go through it fairly quickly. We presented this at our first public meeting, and then the refined version was shown at the open house in February. No changes have been made to any of these criteria. We basically broke it down into 3 separate sections. One was related to transportation. What type of access each one of these parcels has to roads? Does it have access to 1 road, 2 roads, 3 roads? Are they arterial roads, collector roads, or are they just your average local street? And depending on how many roads it has connections to, whether they're arterials, collectors, or locals, there's a score that was given to them for that. Yeah, integration to community was the second one. There are a few different features that we put in here. The ability to distance to existing commercial. One of the benefits of building communities and settlement areas is you get to have different uses close to each other. There's an opportunity to do things like walk to places, bike to places. So the distance to these type of commercial uses, that we provided extra points for something like that. What the existing official plan designation for Malahide was, there was another one, connectivity, and then compatibility with some other uses was also a score. And then finally was engineering. So how easy is it to provide water, sanitary, stormwater services to those? Are there pipes already close to that are the right size? And it's really just a matter of extending those pipes out for service? Or are there other upgrades that are more complicated that might need to be done that would have to cost and add to the complication of adding those in? The next 3, I'm actually not going to speak to them, but each one of these are those criteria that I just talked about in more detail. The presentation is available, and this is the same as what we have available at the last open house at the end of February too. So transportation, integration with community, and then the engineering criteria. And at that, I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Rachel. Rachel worked on the parcel scoring with me, and she'll go through what the actual parcel scoring was, as well as what our final recommendations are for residential land to be included in the employment plan.
The evaluation criteria were finalized, the candidate parcels were scored. The map shown here outlines the candidate parcels for residential and community area. These parcels are all located south of the CN rail corridor. The scoring of these parcels for transportation and integration of community were complete by multiple Stantec staff to cross-reference the scores given to each criterion. The engineering section was scored by the Director of Infrastructure at the town of Aylmer, Terry. Terry scored the other sections as well, so his scores were also cross-referenced with what Stantec had. The table outlines the scores each parcel received, sorted from highest total score to lowest total score. The score for each category is also outlined in this table, so for transportation, integration, and engineering. It also highlights the developable area of the parcel, which considers the Conservation Authority regulated lands, CN rail corridor setback, and D6 land use compatibility setbacks for industrial facilities and lands. As shown, parcel W had the highest overall score with 63 out of 72 points, followed by B with 56 points and T with 54 points. So M, H, R, I, A, F, A, E, E, and K all scored within 5 points of each other between 45 and 50. Moving on to our recommendations. Starting off, this process was informed by the Provincial Planning Statement of 2024, Section 2.1, Planning of People and Homes, and Section 2.3, Settlement Areas and Settlement Area Boundary Expansions, provide direction to planning authorities for assessing necessary land supply and considering the expansion of settlement areas. 2.1.1 states, as informed by provincial guidance, planning authorities shall base population and employment growth forecasts on Ontario population projections published by the Ministry of Finance and may modify as appropriate. Section 2.1.3 states, at the time of creating a new official plan and each official plan update, sufficient land shall be made available to accommodate an appropriate range and mix of land uses to meet projected needs for a time horizon of at least 20 years, but not more than 30 years, informed by provincial guidance. Planning for infrastructure, public service facilities, strategic growth areas, and employment areas may extend beyond this time horizon. Section 2.1.5, states where planning is conducted by an upper tier municipality, the land and unit supply maintained by the lower tier municipality, identified in policy 2.1.4, shall be based on and reflect the allocation of population and units by the upper tier municipality. We have divided our recommendations for residential and community area into two options. Our first recommendations is for parcel V and W. These parcels received the highest scores in transportation and community integration and strong scores in engineering. Parcel B received a combined score of 56, and parcel W received a combined score of 63, and they have a combined net developable area of 44.6 hectares. Parcel AF, which has a developable area of 0 hectares, is also recommended for inclusion to avoid creating an exclave parcel. Our second recommendation for residential and community area is also for parcel B and W, but with limited boundary rounding out. Additional parcels from option 1 are already developed for residential or commercial uses, meaning they do not have any developable area and would not be counted towards the deficit. These are recommended to be brought in to allow for rounding out of the municipal boundary. This would ensure the jurisdiction of abutting municipalities is clear, simplifies municipal cost sharing agreements, and minimizes jurisdictional discontinuity for both municipalities. And candidate parcels north of the CN rail corridor were considered. We are recommending that parcels A and B, along with the smaller surrounding parcels for rounding out purposes, be included in the boundary. These parcels are being recommended as they are adjacent to existing industrial uses and align well with the current boundary. These parcels also scored high for engineering and services criteria. And that was our presentation on the process and recommendations for the town of Aylmer settlement area boundaries.
The next item is the report by the chief administrative officer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be brief so we can get on to hearing from those in attendance as quickly as possible. This boundary adjustment process has been one of the most thorough, if not the most thorough, done in the province of Ontario this term of council. Certainly, we need to exclude St. Thomas, as that was really quite different from a regular boundary adjustment. But when you consider other boundary adjustments undertaken, at least in southwestern Ontario, they really lack the diligence, stakeholder consultation, public consultation, and parcel review that the town of Aylmer has undertaken. Without generalizing, we see that what commonly occurs is a municipality identifies a large swath of desirable lands and has council make the request for those lands to come into their boundaries, and that's where the negotiations start. So you don't generally see the level of analysis, stakeholder engagement, public engagement, or detail that's been undertaken by Aylmer to advance a recommendation. The process that we undertook was methodical, and the lands requested are relatively small to try to support productive negotiations with Malahide. When you look at the mapping, it's important to note that the lands being identified for negotiations are not large. They may appear so simply because Aylmer is only 637 hectares. So Aylmer is really constrained. It's very unique as a municipality in having so little land to grow in. It's almost unheard of for a municipality to not have land to expand or growth into. So that's one of the reasons why when you look at the parcels, they appear large. We're talking about between 0.1 to 0.2% of Malahide's land that we're considering here tonight. So again, this is not a large parcel of land, especially when you look at the other boundary adjustments that happen. And that's intentionally, and that's what we're recommending is intentionally not going for a large parcel of land to try to help with negotiations. For members of public, it's very important for us to highlight that this boundary adjustment has no impact on your property rights. This is not the town trying to purchase or annex your lands. We're not looking to buy lands. We don't own any land. We don't benefit from any of the adjustment ourselves. We are recommending the modified option 2 based in my staff report, based off of Stantec's report. This would seek to avoid incorporating the livestock operation in parcel W and instead round off the parcel so that there's easily understandable boundaries of the municipality. So it's very common to align boundaries with roadways so people understand where they're voting, what municipality they represent. So we're doing this for several reasons, recommending this for several reasons. Electoral representation. So these are existing fringe areas that likely already identify strongly with the town of Aylmer due to their close proximity and access to services. As a result, these residents may want to have a greater voice in the town of Aylmer. And if the lands behind them or adjacent begin to be developed, it's very important that we give them input on it. So if you're going to have a park built behind your property, it's very important that you have input on a trail system or connectivity. We don't want people bordering the town of Aylmer in close proximity to neighborhoods that are created and not having any connectivity to that neighborhood. It's really important that we integrate and develop these neighborhoods in a way that's appropriate from a planning standpoint. Certainly, electoral representation. We want to ensure that people have input at council when development's going on. If you have dust complaints or anything like that, it's important to be a resident of the town of Aylmer so that you can get the appropriate response from your municipal government. And again, mapping understanding. It's very important for people to understand what municipality they reside in. Very important for coordination of services to have a clear flow so services can go in. I think it's one of the most common things that we see at the town of Aylmer in town hall is people coming into our office and saying, am I a resident of Aylmer? It happens all the time where people walk into town hall and ask for services. We don't want that confusion or to create that confusion in the future, especially when the development is going to be happening behind them that will be part of Aylmer. I do know that previously we heard some concerns at the public meetings around differences in taxation rates between municipalities. I can provide some specific impact estimates upon individual properties if that assists any members of the public here. I can relay that if you're in Malahide and currently are on municipally provided water, you would save approximately $838.52 in 2025 if you were part of Aylmer, based on annual provincial average usage of 230 cubic meters per year. So without generalizing, there are property owners that may see a net savings of several $100s a year through being included in the town of Aylmer. With that, you would also see the additional benefit of Aylmer's service levels. And again, I'm happy to share specifics on any property if a property owner wants. To conclude, I just want to, one other thing that I certainly did want to touch on is that the town is seeking 77 hectares roughly. And the reason isn't to expand our settlement boundary that much. We have an option to expand our corporate boundary and not fully expand our settlement boundary. One of the issues that we have had in Aylmer in the past is we've had development be tied to one subdivision, one developer. And if they slow down or stop, we don't see growth. So it is important to diversify and have various developers to ensure growth continues. And for that reason, we don't want to be constrained in the future to say that we're just going to take the minimal. We need to be able to have multiple developers working, not just one or two, because when one stops or goes bankrupt, it means all growth stops and it goes right on the tax base. So we need to have that diversity so that growth continues regardless of individual developers. Essentially to conclude, I just want to relay that the boundary adjustment is absolutely necessary. It's been necessary since 2012. Aylmer is a fast-growing community. We've seen fast growth in residential, significant fast growth, especially the last half of last year. We've just sold approximately 30 acres of employment land within the last year that we expect will be fully developed within the next couple of years. So we need more employment land, we need residential land, and really we can't go into our community and start buying existing neighborhoods and knocking down houses to put apartment buildings up to meet the intensification, the population targets. We need to do this work or else there will be a crisis of housing affordability that's worse than what it is. We need to have housing affordability for both communities of Malahide and Aylmer. So certainly we're advancing this because it is in the best interest of the public of both communities to see growth and to see us address what the province's housing crisis right now. So that's certainly my main points, but I do want to open it up to the floor and hear from the public. That's what we're here for tonight.
Thank you very much for the report. The next item is, are there any members of the public wishing to speak to the application? If so, as I said earlier, please come up to the mic, give your name and your property. Just come up, you're ready.
Just comments on behalf of the Township of Malahide. I don't know if you want us to go now or perhaps after.
Whatever you wish, like on right now.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this meeting. My name is Nathan Diaz. I'm the CEO of the Township of Malahide. I would like to begin by conveying the Township's appreciation for the work undertaken by Aylmer so far to advance the exploration and eventual negotiations on the potential boundary expansion. We have also appreciated being included in the All Parties Advisory Group, which has culminated in the report being presented by Stantec this evening. Malahide has carefully reviewed the two reports being considered this evening and has provided detailed comments to capture our observations, concerns, and questions. The document we wrote is lengthy. We are, after all, dealing with a really important topic, and it was submitted as correspondence. For the benefit of the public and the discussion this evening, we wanted to highlight three key questions that have emerged upon reviewing the submitted reports. Number one, why is staff recommending over 75 hectares despite evidence of a need for 35.6 hectares and a Stantec recommendation of 44.6 hectares? Number two, why remove or reduce the scoring emphasis on agricultural and environmental considerations and include parcels that scored lower or weren't scored at all? Number three, why do the final recommendations appear misaligned with the provincial planning statement, the Elgin County official plan, and OMAPRA's minimum distance separation MDS requirements? We will look forward to having those questions clarified so that Malahide Council and staff can continue to assess the recommendations being considered. Finally, since Aylmer is getting ready for negotiations with Malahide, we want to reiterate some of the prerequisites we had identified and communicated to Aylmer in January 2024. In our view, productive and meaningful negotiations will be possible to be initiated when the following is provided to Malahide: a report documenting a clear justification and business case for the removal of prime agricultural lands for development purposes, a report on the impacts of minimum distance separation requirements on livestock operations and agricultural resources, a report on the financial and operational impacts of boundary expansion on both the town and township, including impacts on tax revenues, use of infrastructure and servicing capacity, provision of soft services and additional costs. In conclusion, the township wants to reiterate that we remain open to restructuring discussions, provided that they are supported by solid evidence, adherence to provincial and regional policies, and respect for agricultural and environmental considerations. We firmly believe that both communities will benefit from well-informed, policy-compliant decisions. That is why we have raised specific questions and why we have identified key documents as a precursor to negotiations. Thank you again for the opportunity to let the public know of Malahide's position at this stage. Keeping in mind that negotiations have not begun, we do look forward to productive discussions and a responsible path forward for the Township of Malahide and the town of Aylmer. Thank you.
Members of the public wish to speak.
Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Wendell Graves. I'm here with my wife Cindy. We're at 9078 Rogers Road. I think I know a couple of answers to what I'm going to ask, but I just thought maybe for clarification, it might be helpful. Certainly when I spoke with some of the neighbors. First of all, we were kind of surprised to get a letter from the town of Aylmer versus from our own home municipality about this meeting. So maybe could someone just say that a statutory thing that Aylmer has to reach over the boundary and talk to neighbors on the other side of the line?
Sorry, if you want to ask all your questions, and then council members can maybe ask us after you're done.
In terms of the big picture process, I understand, unless the rules have changed, that you would be looking to have a mutual boundary adjustment. That would mean that ultimately both municipalities would have to agree to the pieces and the negotiations, etc. And then once that's achieved, then you require the county of Elgin as a whole to authorize the agreement. And I don't think that process has changed. And I guess why I'm asking that is, has the act changed or the province changed the rules so that a municipality can impose over another municipality and disregard what the other municipality or the county might say? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, I have maybe just two more quick questions. When it comes to the negotiations between the two municipalities, would that be a transparent process? And is there points within that process that are statutory that require public input, such as this one, so that we can see what's going on? And is there an appeal process attached to those negotiations if the public wants its input? I'm not saying any of these things to be contrary. I'm just wanting to get information, okay, so that we all understand the game rules. However, I will say this. I was surprised to see this last slide. And was this the CAO's report? Was this something that's posted on your website, or is that just presented tonight for the first time? Because it's posted, so this is known information. Okay, because this obviously it's a big deviation from what your consultants are recommending. So I was a bit alarmed when I saw that for sure. So there'll be more discussion about that, but I'll let others, take the floor, but I appreciate responses to those questions.
Certainly, can briefly, provide a response. I believe the first one was, Aylmer's leading the process. Aylmer has, the one that has initiated the boundary adjustment. Certainly, as we go forward, from this process, the next phase is to request negotiations, but ultimately all that needs to, negotiations aren't necessary to go to the next stage. The next stage is just for Aylmer Council to make a recommendation to Malahide Council to consider on the parcel adjustment. We certainly are hopeful that negotiations will occur and we can sit down and work through some of those issues that Malahide raised tonight. There is an official plan process later on. And certainly if negotiations go forward, and we can reach a mutual agreement that is preferential, there is a process for the province to intervene if there is not agreement from both municipalities. So we certainly do hope that we can work with our neighbors. I don't believe the negotiations will be open to the public, but there is a definite requirement for both municipalities to undertake official plan and hold another public hearing on any boundary adjustment. So there will be further public consultation in that form. I think that answers the questions.
Okay, anybody else? Else go forward, has the clerk received any additional communications related to the application?
The additional communications were added to the agenda from the three homes in the township of Alma.
Thank you. Council, any comments or questions? Council has at this point. Council Brazil.
Thank you. Are we going, as council, are we going to receive clarification from the questions that were asked from the township of Malahide?
Certainly this meeting is here for the purpose of us receiving an input. There is a definite deadline to get this process done, which is the 2026 election. So we certainly need to have this resolved before March. So I wouldn't predetermine what council's decisions are, but I do certainly think that most of the issues that were raised by Malahide sitting around the table over a cup of coffee, we can hopefully work them out if they're willing to sit down and negotiate some of these items. Some of them are quite easy, I think, to resolve. And I think the diligence that we've done to date and the work that we've done to date and the study that we've done to date, Aylmer can't afford to not get this done before the next electoral boundaries are set for the 2026 election.
The comment, it's been a long time since Aylmer has done any kind of boundary adjustment. And so this process is kind of new to everybody. And, you know, it's a long drawn out process and there's a lot of questions that people have, but I want to come back to a couple of points that were mentioned, first of all, by the CAO, that, you know, Aylmer is a very compact community. And really, we are full in terms of growth. You know, growth will pay for growth. And I come back to also what Nathan has said, he said that we can work together. I know that both communities will benefit, and I really believe that. I believe we will work this out with Malahide so that both communities benefit in some way from this boundary adjustment. It's necessary for Aylmer, and I believe it will be good for Malahide as well. Other comments from council? Councilor Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a clarification, one of the, I assume, is the justification for the extra land, was mentioned by the CAO that we are looking to diversify as far as developers go, is that correct?
Through, yes, that's correct. It's also, we certainly didn't want to sit down at the table to negotiate with Malahide and have them say, well, we'll get more assessment if you take in more properties. And we certainly didn't want to have to come back to this process and add in properties later. We wanted this to be the shock meeting where people saw the full scope of it. We do think it's quite reasonable in terms of identifying community and making sure that people have neighborhoods. Usually the process of aligning your municipality with existing roadways works, but yeah, we would like to see us taking on lands beyond what we need for our urban settlement area. So lands that will remain farmland in the immediate future, but could eventually be still within Aylmer's new corporate boundary, but then could be later developed in an expansion for our urban boundary to have further growth so that we don't have to have this process again if our growth exceeds expectations, which we think it will. And we'll have to come back in 10 years and redo this process and certainly cause concern for residents of both municipalities, because it is a devolved process, and I don't like receiving letters at my house either. We can understand that. I hope that's just.
Anyone? Seeing none,
Oh, I see a question. The only one asking questions, so I think the floor should be allowed. The question that I have regarding this is that, especially based off the letter that was received from the town of Malahide, I would, before I received the letter, I had those same questions from these reports, and I feel like there's critical information that is still missing from this discussion. This is a very critical discussion to have. So personally, I feel that this decision should be deferred until we have all the pieces of the puzzle to make an informed decision. I don't feel council right now is making an informed decision based on the information that is provided. So personally, I would like to move that this decision is deferred until we have council has the full information to make an informed decision.
Sorry. If we certainly, some of the comments raised would be addressed through the next process, which would be the official plan process, but we certainly haven't addressed them at this time because our intention was to sit down with Malahide and work through those issues. So some of the issues are stuff where we're not going to have a solution until we can get across the table from Malahide and have a discussion with them, find out ways that we can work it out. But this, in terms of the amount of information, I'd be hard pressed to find a council that's had more detailed review or information presented before advancing a boundary adjustment during this term. This is extremely thorough work. And certainly it is a challenge when you take the jump from the planning recommendation to try to create a mapping for what our community will be. But I certainly would suggest that there isn't a lack of information, that the town's done a lot of due diligence on this.
I just wanted to add to that. We certainly have had fulsome process here. And the three questions that Mr. Diaz mentioned, Malahide would like to see answered, we will do that. We will do that before negotiations start. And let's just say we'll work through the negotiations to make sure that both municipalities benefit from this process. Okay, I think we've had enough discussion on that point. If there's no further comments from the public, did you have a question? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Further to Councilor DeRosa's comments, the process to this particular point has been very thorough. And as I understand, as we move forward, we're getting into direct negotiations with the Township of Malahide to address any of the concerns that they have. This is just part of the process. And the next step is that discussion with Malahide.
Further discussion then? We can adjourn the public meeting and council can consider an action on the report. Owen, can you read the recommended resolution?
The council do now close this public meeting at 7:46 p.m. And reconvene the meeting of council.
Mover and seconder, Councilor Chapman and Deputy Mayor Bartlett. All those in favor? Next item, Owen, can you read the recommended resolution regarding this application?
That report CAO 17-25 respecting the boundary adjustment public meeting be received for information, and that council adopt a modified option 2 of the Stantec report to advance to negotiations of incorporating residential and community area lands into the town of Aylmer and the township of Malahide along with adjacent parcels. And that council further adopt the recommendations of the Stantec report to advance negotiations of incorporation of employment lands into the town of Aylmer with the township of Malahide, and that council indicate the town's potential desire to negotiate for inclusion of lands surrounding the ECC with the township of Malahide at a future date if the existing livestock operations cease.
Thank you. Mover and seconder. Councilor Barber. Again. Seconder, Councilor Rosenberg. CEO, want to add any comments before we move to council discussion?
I probably talked more than enough tonight.
If you didn't hear that, he said you probably talked more than enough to their council. More discussion. Councilor Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I please have a recorded vote, please?
Pardon me?
Can I please have a recorded vote,
Recorded
please?
votes are ready for the vote. Vote. Councilor Roy, did you have a comment?
Am I going to ask a question about it? I kind of was thinking as it was going, and I still ask the question. So if it happens, the agricultural land that is zoned agricultural will stay agriculture, like the zoning will, correct?
Mr. Mayor. So the intention is, if we can reach an agreement with Malahide, a mutual agreement, the lands would be incorporated. And at the same time as the official plan amendment, the portions of land required for settlement area expansion would become a settlement area. But as was noted, we're asking for more than the minimal. And those lands that aren't required to meet the minimal settlement area expansion would remain in their current zoning within the town of Aylmer and said.
So what happens if you develop the property, don't want to sell the property and develop it? How does that play out?
I don't believe that's an issue with any of these properties. I believe that everybody whose property would be developed on is highly supportive.
What happens then, like later on, because we put the other one in the boundary or in it, and they don't want to sell it?
Great question. We're not going to pressure anybody to do anything. If you're farming your land and you want to farm it for the rest of your life and your kids want to farm it, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Thank you.
Seeing no other question. For the vote.
Councilor Ron,
Yes.
Councilor Barber,
Yes.
Councilor Chapman, Councilor DeSouza,
No.
Councilor Roslich,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Roder,
Yes.
and Mayor Cook,
Yes.
and the vote is carried 6-1.
Thank you very much. Yes, the next item is German. Resolution.
The council do now adjourn at 7:50 p.m.
Mover and seconder, Councilor Rosier and Councilor Chapman. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much.